Budget Director Seneme, you got 15 minutes to do your presentation. Colleagues, do we need a formal presentation from Bob? Or can we just jump right into questions and feedback about the budgeting process, recognizing we've got 15 minutes?
Let's go through it.
You got one slide?
Yeah, just to go.
Way to overdo it, Bob.
One service, one.
Take it away. You can sit there if you want. You can get up. Free to take your mask off if you want, and while you're speaking, of course.
So while Marguerite is pulling that up, I can get started because it is just one slide. So good morning to the council. My name is Bob Seneme, Budget Director for the city, and the slide we're going to pull up, BBMR is a bureau within the Department of Finance. So this, our service is just one service within the Department of Finance, which we'll pull up in a moment here. If you want to reference the budget book while we're pulling this up. So our budget for next year is $2.3 million. We have a total of 19 positions in BBMR in my shop, so a lean staff to be overseeing about a $4 billion city budget. I see it there. There we go, thank you. So again, Service 708 under the Department of Finance. Recommended budget for this year is $2.3 million. There is one additional funded position in BBMR for this year. So we made an enhancement request, actually part of the budget process that we managed that was approved. It's an additional budget analyst position that's going to be focused largely on special funds and internal service funds. So a lot of our focus is naturally on the general fund because it's where we have the most discretion with how to spend our dollars. But what we've learned over the past few years is that we do have special funds or what we call internal service funds that are managed by other agencies where there have been issues where we need additional oversight. In terms of the performance measures, wanted to highlight a couple things. So you'll notice here one of our measures is the number of residents that are engaged in our annual budget planning process. And we have really ramped up our efforts there. We do, we have a presence on social media. We do community events, including with a lot of the council members here in their districts that want to just learn about the budget or how to gauge in the budget. We participate in the Planning Academy multiple times a year. And of course, our Taxpayers Night where folks can come and comment on the budget. So we have increased our target for how many folks can engage in the process due to our increased efforts there. One measure that you don't see here that's in the book that I wanted to mention is revenue accuracy, the accuracy of our forecast. We aim to be within 2% in terms of where we end up on the revenue side versus the adopted budget. It's very important because revenue accuracy is something that drives what we can spend or what we can't spend. If we're too low, there might be resources that we had that we couldn't allocate. If we're too aggressive, then we can get the city into financial problems. So we were actually, our actual for 2021 during COVID, we were within 1% of our revenue forecast, which is really, I think, amazing given all the uncertainty around COVID that we came in almost exactly where we expected to be. I wanted to make two other notes, also not on the slide, just a couple things. We restarted our outcome-based budgeting process this year, something that many members of the council might have heard about that we hadn't done in many years. Again, it's meant to be a process that brings more people into the process and helps the decision-making process, which I think is a good precursor to next year when council will have more authority. Our staff is also still overseeing federal aid from CARES Act and FEMA. CARES Act, I've explained, has expired now, but we still are seeking reimbursement from FEMA for many COVID-related activities. We have received, I checked this last week, we have received $83 million of reimbursement from FEMA for COVID-related activities, and that has largely been managed by our team with Ernst & Young help supporting us, which I think is, again, really an astonishing accomplishment that we have been able, we picked that strategy right away that we needed support from an outside consultant. We identified that there was money available through the federal government. And that has helped us to do some of our COVID-related activities, especially vaccination, sheltering for homeless individuals, and food distribution. And then finally, just in response to the questions from council in advance of this hearing about revenue-generating positions, I just wanted to highlight that we started a unit this year called the Corporate Compliance Unit. It's a joint effort between BBMR, Law Department, and Revenue Collections to make sure that entities are paying taxes. We've especially been looking at self-reported taxes, where you have to rely on the good faith of the person reporting that information to the city. There's a lot of room for abuse, of course. That unit has already back collected $5.9 million of previous year parking-related or hotel tax, which is, I think, again, a great accomplishment. We have, discussed things like parking enforcement, housing code enforcement, which we'll talk about in those hearings, but our focus for this year was on that corporate compliance because we thought there was the biggest bang for the city's buck. We just really have one dedicated person, an attorney, working with BBMR and Revenue Collections, and they've been really able to track down a lot of those outstanding issues. So I will pause there and take any questions about BBMR, about the process, or any other questions about the budget as a whole.
Perfect. Councilman Schleifer is going to go next. I've got 4 quick comments. One, can you send us a written narrative explaining what that corporate compliance unit is, who it's made up of, what it does, and all that to say I'm thrilled to hear that you've done that, because I've been complaining to you about illegal surface parking lot operators in South Baltimore around the stadiums for about the day I started on the council. So thank you very much. That's excellent news. 2, wanted to thank you and your team. You are my favorite budget director that I've worked with. And also want to specifically thank Mara James, who's been excellent on the communication. We've seen a marked improvement, I think, in communications from BBMR to the council, and I know that Mara has played a very large role in that. 3, I look forward to reviewing what she actually sent out over the weekend with respect to opportunities to generate new revenue through, or opportunities to generate additional revenue through existing mechanisms such as parking enforcement, code enforcement, special investigations unit at DHCD. And I forget my 4th comment, so I'll go to Councilman Schleifer.
Bob, I sent you guys an email 3 months ago with some basic stuff that I wanted to get through to before it getting done last minute, getting into budget hearings. I wanted to be proactive. You guys took 2.5 months to get me the information. Did anybody tell you to sit on that information?
No. What I think we communicated before to you is that, we have a very busy time of the year when we're preparing to get the budget released in publications, out to the public. So we did take the time right after we met our final deadline to go back and look at the information that you were asking for, which we sent over at the end of last week.
No, you sent partial information over, and it wasn't in the format that we discussed, and it wasn't with the clarity that we discussed, which is why we now need to somehow find time to have a meeting with DPW prior to their hearing, which hopefully we get to the bottom of some of those questions, because I will go line for line with them at their hearing. Is that a reasonable amount of time for a city council person to wait for basic questions to be answered?
So, like we communicated with you, we try to be as responsive as possible on those requests. We were aware of the request. We said that we would get that information because it was historical information that we would have to track down. And, we sent, what we sent over is the lowest level of detail we have for the Bureau of Solid Waste for the last 4 years. I think it's very clear data. Frankly, if you look at it, there's notes, very detailed notes about what costs have grown during COVID and DPW, where we have seen costs go down. The additional questions that you're talking about, the meter shop, and I believe there's the meter shop and mechanical street sweeping is actually in the utility fund, and DPW did respond to that, will be responding to that. That was on the letter that we got before the council hearings.
All right, so that's you provided partial information. That's the bottom line. And so, if CAO Shorter sent you that same email on the same date I did, how long would it take you guys to get back to him?
Well, we would respond. We would respond as quickly as possible. Given the other things that are pending.
So when we have active stuff that are impacting our constituents every single day of the year, and are having a significant impact on the city, if we can't get an answer within months, I mean, what should we do? I mean, we have basic city functions not being provided. I proactively ask those questions in advance so we can get to a point where they're going to be provided. Who is responsible? If it's not you, that's fine. I understand you're the middleman, but should we not be email? I mean, because in previous years we've been told, send you guys stuff, you get it from the agencies. Clearly that didn't work this year. Clearly you guys failed me. You failed the citizens of Baltimore, because I can't tell you how many calls I get about the functions that I emailed about. Street sweeping, recycling pickup. Those are two functions that have existed routinely up until this past year. And so clearly there's reasons, and clearly there's things we need to get to the bottom of. I mean, at the last DPW hearing, we heard a lot of nonsense and a lot of excuses, and we didn't get any clarity on just basic answers then. So who should I be contacting if I want to get answers in a reasonable amount of time? Should I still be contacting you guys? Should I contact the city administrator? Should I just call the mayor directly? Who should I be reaching out to when I have a simple question that needs to be answered?
Well, in terms of financial information, our staff, coordinates the budget, so we have access to data across all of the agencies, of course, to put the budget together. That response that we gave to you, we did have to check that with DPW, because DPW has, each of the agencies, each of the large agencies has their own fiscal staff too, that are closer to the details in that particular agency. So, when you make a request like that to us, we can gather the data, but we also often need to sit down with the agency folks to get a deeper understanding, because they're going to be closer to some of those individual questions. So I think it's okay to send it through to BBMR, and we can, again, attempt to coordinate with agencies. I'm just asking for understanding that during those months of March, April, and May, I mean, we have a deadline almost every day of things that are charter required that we must get out in terms of the release of the budget. So we communicated right away that we were going to share that information once we got through our budget deadlines, that we would go back and look at that and work with DPW on it.
So are you saying, okay, what is a reasonable amount of time for my request to have taken? Put yourself in my shoes. Okay, you get some pretty basic questions emailed to you.
It wasn't a basic question.
I think it's pretty basic. I mean, these are basic city services.
All right, guys, let's take a step back here. So, Councilman, when did you send the request?
I sent it 3 months ago.
Hang on.
You sent an email without many specifics. You eventually made a formal request and said you wanted to see cost savings. Let me explain what I saw. You asked that you wanted to see cost savings related to certain services. I went back and produced every nickel that has been spent in the Bureau of Solid Waste over the last 4 years, showing you a pre-COVID year in fiscal 19, a COVID year in fiscal 20 and 21, knowing that things changed during those years, and then what I would call kind of a recovery year where things were getting a little bit back to normal in fiscal 22. That's not a simple request. That requires me to pull all of that data together. That requires me or an analyst to look through that data and try to understand what the trends are. That requires me to go and sit down with DPW and ask them, hey, I'm seeing that for line item A, we went from spending $1 million to $1.2 million in this year. That's not something that I'm necessarily going to know at that level of detail. And then combine that and then put notes together to say, this is what we are seeing happening from a pre-COVID perspective to today in the Department of Solid Waste, which we produced. And I think it's pretty self-explanatory of what's going on. What we've explained is that we do have some savings for certain activities in solid waste. There has been less spending on vehicles and vehicle repair and fuel, for example, but there are other costs that have grown. We provided stipends to folks during COVID-19. That's a cost increase. We're paying more for tipping fees for taking materials to either the landfill or the incinerator. And that was all laid out, I think, pretty cleanly in that response. So I needed the time to go back and look through all of that data, analyze that data when we had a free moment to make sure that we could make an accurate response to you that I think provided a level of detail that explains what's happened over the last.
So in one of my more than a dozen follow-ups on it,
There weren't a dozen follow-ups. There weren't a dozen follow-ups.
There absolutely
A dozen
was.
is 12. There weren't 12 follow-ups.
Yeah,
Okay, guys, we're gonna. So here's what we're gonna do. We're gonna curb this topic for a moment here. So, Councilman, you made a request. Bob, you took some time to respond to this. What I know is that the two of you have had an excellent working relationship in the time that you all have been here, and I think, Bob, your team probably, from the onset could have responded immediately to at least say I'm in receipt. If there was some clarification needed around the councilman's request, there was probably an opportunity to have reached out to get that clarification. Councilman, I'm quite confident that Bob wants to be responsive to your request in totality. So what I'm going to ask is if the three of us can talk after this session is over to make sure that Bob is clear on exactly what it is that the councilman needs. And Bob, you can provide an estimate, a time frame for how he can get that information to you ASAP, preferably prior to the DPW hearing, so that you're in a position to understand what you need to understand and to be able to ask the appropriate questions to DPW.
Yeah, well, the follow-up has already been put out there. I mean, what needs to happen is there needs to be a meeting with myself, the budget office, DPW's budget people, and DPW's leadership. And when I said a dozen, that was being conservative, because I'm not just referring to the amount of emails that I sent you and your team and the amount of times, in meetings or even just speaking to you guys, including my budget thing. And you guys had said plenty of times that you haven't been able to work on it yet, and you'll get to it. And then you were able to put it together in pretty short amounts of time. But again, that's months later, dropped on me right before budget time, basically about the same time the books are dropped on us, which is a whole different story. I think we need more time to be able to adequately review it. But I also reached out to the Mayor's Office of Government Relations multiple times about it. I also reached out to Mayor's leadership team about this topic multiple times also. So when I say a dozen, I'm being conservative. Okay, and I'm not even including the amount of times I asked DPW for the information. I only went to you guys as more of a last resort, because DPW couldn't answer the question of how many days employees who get COVID or are exposed to COVID are quarantining for. So I was not going to expect them to be able to answer any questions like, okay, what's your cost savings on recycling versus street sweeping and some of these functions. It's made pretty apparent that there's some pretty severe issues over there, which is being taken out on the citizens of Baltimore who are not getting their most basic functions that they're paying for met. So my follow-up on that is that we need to have that meeting, and it needs to be before the DPW budget hearing. And like I said to you guys, in person, face-to-face, was that not only do I need answers, so you provided that spreadsheet, and I appreciate that, but that I need adequate time to be able to ask follow-up questions and have those questions answered. Because what it looks to me is a whole lot like what we dealt with the previous budget director, that wouldn't get us the questions that we want, answers that we wanted, and things would get thrown on us last minute, like a Friday evening news dump. We need answers in a reasonable amount of time, and 3 months in advance before budget hearing is far in advance. If now you're telling me you want 6 months in advance, it's kind of crazy, but I can start working on that because I already have notes for next year. But I would like to know when that meeting's going to be, and you guys can get back to me after the hearing on that.
Yeah, we're
Three of
scheduling
us will
that.
circle up after this
Yep.
meeting with someone from the government relations team and get that scheduled.
Sure.
Good? All right, very good. Council Vice President Middleton?
I have a ask, and I guess getting back to the questions that my colleague of the 12th district I know he's probably going to ask this at every agency because the administration charged created equity officers or someone in the office or an actual position in each agency for equity. So here is my ask. For the agencies to be prepared to have the answers for these questions when they're called. Has those officers reviewed and or accessed capital projects for community equity, or are the primary focused on equity within agencies regarding manpower? And some projects in some communities seem to be happening at a faster pace. What are the equity officers charged with doing, and what is associated with those offices? So if each of these offices come prepared with answering those questions, I think that would help with the equity piece.
Yeah, I believe there's there's an equity coordinator that has been, I think that's what you're referring to in the agencies.
Right.
Yeah, and they're
I know the Office of Civil Rights is kind of the main people for that, but if, still each agency has that responsibility or has a person assigned, if they come with answering those updated questions, I think that would help us understand the progress of that particular subject under equity.
Okay, yeah, so, yeah, we can communicate that to make sure agencies, when they come, are prepared to answer that. The new positions that were referenced earlier in the budget were in the Office of Civil Rights to help with the training and the coordination. So each agency has a coordinator, but we've been finding that they just need help. They just need help in terms of training what they're supposed to be doing to make sure they can meet the requirements of the law. So,
Okay.
but we'll pass that message along.
Okay, because those are questions that focus on, things that are happening in our communities, the areas that we represent, and if they share some of the changes in their capital projects, just, give us some information of what you have been doing within the, past year. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, colleagues. Assuming there's no other questions for BBMR. Excellent, Bob. The thing I forgot to say, you mentioned the outcome-based budgeting group. Can you provide the committee a list of the individuals that were on that? My understanding, it was bucketed by pillar.
It was by pillar. The names are actually in our. We'll forward you the link. They're actually in the executive summary book.
I don't need it then. Yep, I'm good. Thank you.
They're in the book.
Last thing, this is just me speaking, not on behalf of the committee. I continue to have concerns with the adequacy of the performance measures for some of the other agencies. It's an ongoing conversation we've been having for years. I'm going to save those for the individual agencies. I know you or someone from your team will be here just to talk through those as we get to them.
Yeah, and I should say, just so the committee knows, we play a coordinating role in what's reported. Agencies, for the measures that they have been tracking, they input those during the budget proposal process. So, we try to find if there's issues or things that are not right or that look off to us. But yeah, agencies will come prepared to discuss those. And as you heard earlier, there's going to be we'd like to make a kind of citywide effort to kind of improve performance management. So a lot of the agencies have some measures that they're using now that are pretty good. Other ones need to be replaced or improved. But yeah, that onus is on the agencies. We have an oversight role, but we can't check necessarily accuracy of everything, unfortunately. But they'll be prepared to answer those if you have questions on what's published in the book.
Excellent. Colleagues, everyone good? Bob, thank you so much. Appreciate it. We are now in recess, and we are back at 12:30 for capital budget. Colleagues, lunch in the current room.
Unless you're kosher.